The round of 8 is upon us. The NASCAR Cup Series heads to Las Vegas Motor Speedway this weekend, where Kyle Larson is a two-time defending race winner. Can he three-peat, work his way into the championship four? Will one of those Toyotas finally beat him to the line this time around? What about Joey Logano, a late addition to the round of 8, looking to advance to his record-setting 6th championship four? Let's break down Las Vegas Motor Speedway by the numbers. Joining us now is Greg Mathern, NASCAR analytics expert from wintherace.info, ready to talk a little Las Vegas, the first mile and a half in what's sure to be a mile and a half heavy round. Greg, when looking at Las Vegas, we raced there months ago, early in the season. What other tracks, what other data can we look at to try and predict how the championship contenders will perform this weekend?
Yeah, so it's kind of wild this year. We've got tracks that we obviously think of as, correlated tracks, sister tracks, Kansas being, one of the sister tracks. And we also look at, Charlotte, another mile and a half, Darlington, even though it's a little bit shorter, but similar kind of high banks, high speeds. Those are kind of the tracks that we look at normally. That said, I was kind of looking over stuff this morning, talking to some of the other guys that win the race, and it was kind of astonishing to us how little correlation there has been this year. It's been kind of wild at how much variance there's been. So it's been a lot harder to predict than normal. And so while we normally kind of look at these mile and a halves, particularly Vegas, Kansas, the tracks are like, hey, we've got a ton of comps. Like, this is the big track type on the schedule, right? We should be able to do this. We're randomly, and not just finish correlation not being there, speed correlation being there. Like, we're seeing different guys be up there. And so it's been, kind of a hard one to do. That said, we are still going to come back to, those kind of consistence, the other mile and a half tracks. Really, the only one I'm going to throw out is Texas. That reconfigured turns 1 and 2. That track runs so differently, so chaotically, that it's just not a super predictive track.
Yeah, well, I do want to talk about one driver who may be the most predictable this weekend. Kyle Larson, if you look at his last 6 stage results at Las Vegas, going back to the start of 2023. He's finished second, first. He's swept the stages, won the last 2 Las Vegas races, earned max points along the way. Kyle Larson, anything can happen. In this race a year ago, he almost spun out and lost it midway through the race, but I think we can count on him to have some speed. In the spring race, it was Tyler Reddick nipping at his heels all along. Larson versus Reddick, are they potentially the two analytical favorites coming into this weekend based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to be, right? We talked about it just a couple of weeks ago at Kansas, how strong Kyle Larson is at these tracks. Look at this year, right? He missed a race, right? He wasn't at Charlotte. Did not, I mean, he got there at the very end, but did not get in a car at Charlotte. He's still the laps led leader at the comp tracks that we're talking about. He led 181 laps at Vegas. He then obviously dominated Darlington too before, kind of the end there, right? But he is still the dominant laps led leader at these tracks. He's got twice the laps led of the next guy in the series, who's Chris Bell. So I think Larson absolutely justified favorite. That said, as you mentioned, Tyler Reddick was running him down at the end of that last race. And in fact, over the second half of the race at Las Vegas 1, Reddick was fast. He was the fastest car on track for the entire second half of the race. We look at driver speed over the median speed. So, you take the entire field, figure out what the average speed is, and then like where the drivers are in relation to that. In the last quarter of the Vegas race, Tyler Reddick was almost 2 miles per hour faster than the median speed. He was 1.837. Larson was fast. He was 1.693 over the median speed, but there's still a pretty big gap there. And then there was a huge gap down to Ty Gibbs, who was at 1.14 over the median. So, they were clearly the two fastest cars. Reddick was a little bit faster at the end of the race, was tracking him down. We'll kind of have to see where that goes. Again, we've got that variance that I talked about. It's been a little bit wild. 23-11, who we normally think of, super strong at Kansas, missed both of the Kansas setups, right? I mean, like they were
Yeah.
not a factor in either of those races. So we're, kind of right there. They're the clear two top cars. And again, that's with both of them having like kind of random misses at, some races as of late. So I
Yeah.
think they belong there for sure.
Yeah, well, Tyler Reddick, so smooth and so steady most of the years, run into some inconsistency lately. Had the speed, though, at the Charlotte Roval, completely different track type. Maybe this is the next step towards getting the train back on the tracks. And I don't want to move on without at least mentioning who you mentioned earlier, Christopher Bell. It was Reddick chasing down Larson in the spring, but 1 year ago in this race, it was Christopher Bell chasing down Kyle Larson, another driver to watch for sure. But I want to transition away from Toyota Chevy over to Ford. Team Pensky, thanks to the Bowman disqualification this week, still has two drivers alive for the NASCAR Cup Series championship. Joey Logano, I think historically is thought of as a good Las Vegas racer, especially that spring race, the Pennzoil 400. He's usually in the mix. And this year, he won the pole, but wound up finishing ninth. In fact, I went back and watched. He was blown by Kyle Larson 2.5 laps into that race. So I don't know. Joey Logano is sort of the let's just say he's bringing up the rear of these 8 remaining drivers. He's been by far the least consistent this season. But is there hope for Logano fans that the even year championship 4 streak is going to stay alive?
Yeah, I mean, Penske brought a ton of speed a couple of weeks ago at Kansas. If we particularly long run speed, so we look at the late in a run speed, which is like the last 10% of laps before a pit cycle. Um, Blaney in particular was blazing fast, right? His late in run speed was 165.771 miles per hour. Hamlin was next at 165.097. So Logano was also very fast in there. He was the 5th fastest in that statistic, with Truex and Bowman coming in 3rd and 4th. So certainly, I think those two Penske cars had a ton of speed. Logano is kind of overall probably looked a little bit down on this year, but that's because he really struggled early this year. And honestly, Ford as a whole was struggling, early this year. If we're all looking back, we were like, man, what's going on with Ford? They don't have any wins. Then they won at Darlington, right? Then Keselowski won at Darlington, and they've just picked up since then. So I think we see that as a continuation. Certainly, Penske seems to have kind of hit on something late in the year, and they've picked up their speed as a whole. And certainly, if we get some long green flag runs, I think we got to look out for those Penske Fords.
Yeah, I mean, Joey Logano's a 2-time champion. That kind of pedigree can't be ignored. And to your point, Ryan Blaney, a Ford, Penske Ford, won at Pocono not that long ago, which is a fast intermediate, not really banked, or track isn't exactly the same as Las Vegas, obviously, but there are some similarities there. So to your point at the beginning of this season being difficult to predict, it's been the tale of two halves for Team Penske, especially at the big fast tracks. So Logano, Blaney, someone to watch out for, no doubt. I want to wrap up with Denny Hamlin. Is this finally the start of Denny Hamlin's championship push? He struggled at super speedways in this car. He struggled at road courses, but he survived those first 2 rounds. He said it on his podcast this week. Now, with a couple intermediates, Martinsville, now we race. Is this the start of something special for Denny Hamlin fans? What do the numbers say about Hamlin at Las Vegas?
Yeah, it's funny, the irony of this, if it ends up being his year, right? When the first 2 segments of the playoffs really did not play to him. Older drivers don't do well at drafting tracks. And while we think of Hamlin as a drafter, he's getting up there in age. Like, people his age just don't win at Daytona and Talladega, and obviously the reconfigured Atlanta. And he's a decent road course racer, but not great, right? So for him to be in this position right now is actually kind of, a step above. When we look at the comp tracks, Denny's the speed leader, right?
Really?
And so he is in a really, really strong spot. So again, those comp tracks being Vegas, Kansas, Charlotte, Darlington. If we take those tracks, right, and we look at the incident adjusted speed, his incident adjusted speed at those tracks, he's 1.23 miles per hour over the average. So that's by far, well, not by far the leader, but that's the leader. Byron's kind of right on his heels at 1.21, and then you get Reddick at 1.16 and Larson at 1.12. So there's kind of that cream of the crop up there who I think are all set up very, very well for the next two races in particular. But Denny's at the lead there. He's got to feel like he's in a great spot right now. At those comp tracks, he's the only driver to finish in the top six at, I'm sorry, top 10 at all six of those races. So he's been incredibly consistent. This is just a great spot for him to be in. When we look at top 10 laps, he's obviously, if he's got the speed, makes sense that he's up there. Ty Gibbs has run a few more laps in the top 10 than Denny, but Denny's run 81.7% of his laps in the top 10 at these tracks, right? Larson, obviously, with all those laps led, is still up there in terms of the percentage of laps in those positions, but Denny has been incredibly fast. If Denny can get up to the front, he's going to be an absolute terror for these people because that 11 team has had so much speed at these tracks. Their biggest issue has been that they keep getting buried for whatever reason, be it poor qualifying or, just random issues throughout the race. If he can get up front with a clean car, look out because he's going to be in great spot, in terms of what we've seen his speed so far.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I also think, though, I think it was Kansas recently, troubles on pit road, to your point, buried him in the field numerous times. So I think you're right. Denny Hamlin, they've been very resilient this year. I didn't realize he'd been that fast. I figured he'd be in that top 5 mix, not potentially at the top of the board, depending on the metric. So Denny Hamlin with Vegas and Homestead, watch out. 11 fans, 11 haters. Oof, watch your guy this week. But Greg, thank you so much for being on the show, sharing, as always, the nitty gritty, the deep dive, intense numbers ahead of the round of 8. Thanks for being on the show. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks.